Hi friends, I just wanted to get on here real quick today to give you some encouragement from 1 Samuel. This is a familiar story to many of us. This is the story of David and Goliath. And as we here in Missouri have been fighting a David and Goliath battle as we try to keep our state pro-life and keep children protected in the womb in Missouri, there's a lot of parallels that I discovered as I read through this familiar story again here recently. I just wanted to share them with you. I know we've been sharing a lot of videos through our page here on how to defeat Amendment 3. We've shared a lot of informational videos on the things that are in this wicked amendment. Jeremy's done a lot of work on finding the hidden things in this amendment and why it's just so wicked and would have devastating effects for children in our state. So we've done a lot of that, and I want to just encourage you that the battle is winnable. And I think sometimes we can forget that when we're faced with a big battle. So this week I read the story of David and Goliath, and I just want to walk through a few points in this story with you guys, and I just want to encourage you in this battle that we are currently facing. In the beginning of this story, this is in 1 Samuel chapter 17, in verse 4, Goliath comes out, and we see the story begins, Goliath comes out, and he basically is taunting the army of Israel. And he is a formidable foe. He is 9 feet tall. He's clad in all of his armor. He has a sword that is, I'm sure, very large because he was a very large man. And he comes out and just taunts the army and basically says, when are you going to come fight me? To the army of Israel. And come down here and fight me. He tells them again, come down here and fight me. And the army sees his size and sees his armor, and they run away in fear and feel like nobody can defeat this giant that has come out against them. Similarly, in Missouri, we are fighting a David and Goliath battle against Amendment 3. And we can easily look at the other side. We can see how well funded they are. We can see that they have TV ads already running. We can see that they've got millions upon millions of dollars to fund their disinformation campaign. And it could be easy for us to get discouraged and walk away from the battle and say, this is too big of a fight for us to win. And that's what we see the army of Israel doing at the beginning of this story. It says that for 40 days, every morning and evening, the Philistine champion strutted in front of the Israelite army. So he came out, he was strutting his stuff. He was showing them how big he was, how scary he was, how well armored up he was, and just playing on their fears. Now, here in Missouri, as we're looking at defending life, we could very easily look at the other side and say all of the same things that Israel was seeing in Goliath. They're well-funded. They look very organized. They have their stuff together, and they're showing off all of their things that they have done to try to bring this wicked amendment into our state constitution. But then the story takes a turn, and we see David enter the scene. Now, David has not been at the battle site. His brothers were there, but David was too young, and everybody said, you're too young, you can't fight. Who do you think you are? You're just a kid. And so he would stay back with his father's sheep. So the story picks up, David is delivering some food to his brothers who are there, and he starts asking questions. And one of the questions that he asks, I read this week, verse 26, so this is 1 Samuel 17, verse 26. David gets there and he starts asking questions, and he says, who is this pagan Philistine anyway, that he is allowed to defy the armies of the living God? You see, David knew who his God was. He wasn't blind. He saw Goliath. He saw how big he was. He saw all his armor. But David knew that his God was bigger than even this big giant that was taunting Israel. And he knew that God could defeat this giant. And the question he was asking was, who does this guy think he is, that he can come here and come against the armies of God? And who are we to just sit back and let him? And David was not going to stand for that. And David gets an idea. And he says, well, if none of you are going to go fight him, I will do it. And so he goes to Saul and says, you know what, send me, I'll go out there and do it. And all this time, people have been telling David, you're too small, you're too young, you go take care of the sheep, you don't belong here. But what was happening while David was taking care of the sheep is that God was building his faith, and he was spending time with the Lord. The Bible tells us that David was a friend of God, and he was a man after God's own heart. And we know that he wrote a good portion of the book of Psalms, which were songs that he wrote of praise and worship to God. And so David persisted. In verse 34, it says, he says to Saul, I have been taking care of my father's sheep and goats. When a lion or a bear comes to steal a lamb from the flock, I go after it with a club, and I rescue the lamb from its mouth. If the animal turns on me, I catch it by the jaw and club it to death. I have done this to both lions and bears, and I'll do it to this pagan Philistine. For he has defied the armies of the living God. The Lord who rescued me from the claws of the lion and the bear will rescue me from this Philistine. So David is recalling to mind the previous victories that he has had, where God has helped him to defeat other foes as he was taking care of the sheep. And he's drawing on that and saying, you know what? This fight is no different than those fights. The God that I serve is the same God that rescued me from the lion and the bear, and I see no reason why he won't rescue me in this situation, in this battle, because this enemy is not just a lion and a bear coming after sheep, but instead this enemy is literally coming after God and God's people. And David is not there for it. He's not going to stand for it. And so he convinces Saul to let him go and fight Goliath. And then the next thing is really interesting to me. David's confidence came not in his abilities. He did say, I did these things, but he also said, this giant will be the same to me as the bear and the lion, because God will go and fight this battle. So he wasn't counting on his superior abilities of fighting. He was counting on that God was on his side. But yet again, Saul is looking at this giant who is well armored and who, has a large sword and is 9 feet tall. And he says, you know what? You can't go out there ill-equipped. You have to have armor and you have to have a weapon. And so Saul gives David his weapons. And I think in our fight that we are currently in our state, it would be really easy for us to look at the weapons that the other side has deployed against us. They have TV ads. They have the media on their side. They have print media on their side. So there's newspaper articles and things like that. And we could easily look at that and say, well, the only way to win this battle is to fight basically on their turf and according to their rules. And so that's what Saul tried to do with David. He said, well, you have to have armor. He gave him his armor. And David put it on and he said, I can't wear this. I'm not used to it. And as intercessors, we have to remember that our primary role and goal in this battle is to remember that we are not fighting against flesh and blood. We are fighting a spiritual battle. There are spiritual forces of wickedness at play in this battle of Amendment 3 in our state. And we have to remember that while we need to do our part to share information and people do need to be informed, all of that is worthless if we don't back it up in prayer. Because the root of this, again, is a spiritual root. There is a spirit of death that is coming after children in our state and future generations. And if we forget that the root of the battle is a spiritual battle, then we will lose the battle. And so David gave Saul his armor back. He said, I can't wear this. It doesn't fit me. I'm not used to it. And he says, let me do it the way that I know to do it. And so David goes back to the ways that he's used to, and he goes down. We know how the story ends. He picks up 5 smooth stones from the riverbed and puts them in his sling. And again, Goliath comes out, and he makes fun of David. I don't know if you guys have picked up on this part of the story before. This was a little bit new to me and shocking when I read this week, because it kind of is a little fresh, and it hits a little bit hard right now, because the other side does this in our current battle. They are making fun of us. They are saying, who do you think you are, that you're just going to come out here and say that children are valuable, that babies in the womb are actually people and are alive? They're making fun of us. And it could be really easy for us to get hurt over that and to feel offended. But here's what David did, because the same thing happened to him. Goliath came out, and it says, Goliath sneered in contempt at this ruddy-faced boy. And he said to David, am I a dog that you come at me with sticks? And he cursed David by the names of his gods. So even in this encounter, David is seeing that this is a spiritual battle. Goliath comes out and curses him and makes fun of him. And then Goliath calls on the name of his gods, his false gods that he and the Philistines worship. It's fun for me to kind of imagine what David was feeling in this moment and how I might respond if I was in a similar situation. And it would be real easy to be like afraid, when this giant comes out and starts hurling insults at you. But that's not what David did. He didn't back down. In fact, he doubled down with Goliath. And this is what he said. This is his response to Goliath. He says, and I think this statement makes all the difference in the outcome of this battle. And it really shows where David's heart was and where his mind was. It really shows that he did not go out there to fight Goliath with any sort of pride, that he was just strong enough to do it on his own. And it shows that he was really relying on God's strength through him. He says, you come to me with sword, spear, and javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of heaven's armies, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. Today, the Lord will conquer you, and I will kill you and cut off your head. Now, that's a bold statement, because the battle hasn't started yet. So if you can imagine with me, here we have a 14 or 15-year-old boy who's just been taking care of sheep, facing off against a 9-foot giant, heavily clad in armor, carrying a sword that's probably about as tall as David. And David says, you're gonna die today. Like, that is a bold statement. And I don't think David made it just because he was caught up in his own pride. I think he made it because he knew that this giant who was defying God was going to meet his end today, on that battlefield. We know how the story ends. We know that David defeated Goliath. He did it with 1 stone, and then he cut off Goliath's head with Goliath's own sword. Right there, immediately, as soon as Goliath fell. He didn't waste any time making sure that the giant was completely defeated. I just want to encourage you today that we are in a David and Goliath battle in our state, and we literally are in a battle between life and death. But this battle is winnable. And so I don't know how you've been feeling. I know I've been kind of wavering back and forth between discouragement and encouragement, and feeling like it's impossible, and then feeling like maybe it's possible. But with God, we know that all things are possible, and we know that God desires to see life protected in our state. And so I just want to encourage you today to go get your stones and your sling and prepare your heart to go to battle, not against a man or a group or any person, but against the spiritual forces of darkness that are fueling this wicked death decree that has been written and is trying to be put into our state constitution. If you feel that part of your intercession is to go and talk to your friends and neighbors, to pass out literature, to knock on doors, to make phone calls, great, do that. But I want to encourage you that if you feel like all you are supposed to do is pray and intercede, please don't stop doing that. We need the intercessors in Missouri to continue doing what intercessors do. David was able to go against Goliath with the strength and courage that he had because he remembered to keep his eyes fixed on God. And he knew that that's where his strength came from. If he had taken his eyes off of God and put them on just his own personal ability, I don't know that he would have been able to defeat that giant. There's nothing special about a rock and a slingshot against a 9-foot giant. But what is special is that David knew that it was not really about the rock and the slingshot. And so all of the resources that we have that we're making available to everyone and all of the work that we are doing is good, and we should continue to do it. But we have to remember to continue backing it in prayer. And so I just want to encourage you to continue in your intercession in our state for Missouri and for life in our state, and that we can win this battle. We can see God give us a great victory. We've seen God give us victories for life before, and we will see God give us victories for life again. And so I just want to leave you with that today. Thank you guys for watching this, and thank you for praying with us, for agreeing for Missouri, for agreeing for life. We know that God's heart is to protect life in our state. So thank you, and we will see you soon.